The first public performance of the Spanish classical guitar style in St. Louis was likely given in 1837 by Antonio Martinez, a student of Fernando Sor. In 1839, Martinez joined the music department at St. Louis University and played in a popular trio in the St. Louis area. Sadly, on a concert tour in 1857, Martinez was tragically struck and killed by a trolley in Detroit, Michigan. Mid-19th century and into the early 20th century, St. Louis was a hotbed for jazz and blues musicians traveling the river system between New Orleans and Chicago. Therefore, St. Louis became a cradle for emerging styles of music. Between 1900 and 1907, legendary ragtime pianist and composer Scott Joplin wrote some of his most well-known works at his home on Delmar Avenue. Over the years, many blues guitarists of note have called St. Louis home. During the 19th century, St. Louis was home to many professional guitarists, including Edward Schoenfeld, Jacob Eiler, Thomas Sims, and Henry Vorhauer. In the 19th century, many thought of the guitar as primarily a rhythm instrument to accompany the banjo and mandolin. Fortunately, three men from St. Louis realized its true potential and dedicated their life's work to elevating the importance of the classical guitar and its place as a concert instrument in the United States. One was a magnificent lawyer, one a world-famous guitar virtuoso, and the third a respected author, guitarist, and teacher. Born in 1825, William O. Bateman was a brilliant constitutional lawyer. His law books have been republished and are still for sale online and continue to be used in legal education today. But Bateman was much more than a lawyer. He was trained as a classical guitarist in Philadelphia and was an acclaimed performer, composer, and music engraver. While Bateman lived and worked in Philadelphia, he published classical guitar and piano arrangements in the mid-1800s. William O. Bateman moved to St. Louis in 1874. That same year, Bateman copyrighted his fingering methods in his work System of Uniform Fingering. His method book, School of the Guitarist, was published by Adam Schattinger in 1881. William Foden, born in St. Louis at the start of the Civil War, would become the second guitarist who would lay the foundation of what would one day become the St. Louis Classical Guitar Society. He grew up in his father's variety store, which featured a section of musical instruments. Young Bill studied harmonica and violin, and by age 16 was leading a small orchestra. By this time, he needed an expert guitar teacher. Fortunately, an acquaintance introduced him to William O. Bateman at a party. Bateman began teaching the young William Foden in 1887. Foden took to the guitar and learned quickly.
Any success that I may have achieved is in great measure due to his advice and instruction. William Foden.
Foden excelled at the guitar and became very active professionally. By 1887, he performed regularly with the Beethoven Mandolin and Guitar Orchestra. He also performed with the Classical Trio and scored arrangements for violin, flute, and guitar. Foden and his brother Wallace opened a music store in 1888, where the Edward Jones Dome in the America Center Convention Plaza now stands. The Foden brothers taught music students and published their own sheet music right from the store. They also sold a variety of very popular instruments made by the Washburn Company in Chicago. In 1891, he organized a guitar quintet, which included his student George Krick. Each member of the quintet played solos by Romero, De Haron, Aravallo, William O. Bateman, as well as some of William Foden's own work. Foden's original compositions were influenced by popular social dance music of the time. Light operatic melodies and dances found their way into his work. The area where he lived also influenced his work. In addition to Scott Joplin, Foden lived just a few blocks from the homes of Louis Chauvin, Tom Turpin, and other famous ragtime personalities. Concert halls were also just a short distance away. William Foden lived during the period of ragtime music in St. Louis, and around this same time he taught at the Beethoven Conservatory of Music at 27th and Locust Street, his tenure as instructor there lasting 18 years. The building still stands today, just a few blocks from Foden's home and the home of Scott Joplin. One must wonder if they said hello to each other as Foden walked past Joplin's house on his way to work. During those same years, Foden taught at the Strasburger Conservatory and rode the Grand Avenue streetcar to work. He also coached mandolin and banjo for 15 years at the Smith Academy, founded by author T.S. Eliot's grandfather. Foden was the conductor of the Smith Mandolin Orchestra at the school. Foden's guitar instruction included a successful correspondence course for guitarists. By 1894, Foden had become more than a local celebrity. Cadenza magazine wrote,
Mr. Foden's success is an example of what properly directed study, allied with natural talent and ability, may accomplish. He is acknowledged by the best critics to be one of the greatest guitarists before the public today, and one of the greatest of any time. Cadenza, 1894.
Later in the 90s, he would regularly contribute articles on fretted instruments for Cadenza. Foden had become so famous that crowds attended his concerts from across the Midwestern states, but he had never performed outside of the Midwest. William Foden was a family man, devoted to his wife and son, and disliked travel from home for more than a short time. But to advance his career, Foden finally accepted an offer to play Carnegie Hall. On January 29, 1904, Foden played Carnegie Hall and was proclaimed the greatest guitar player in the world by Cadenza magazine.
One is at a loss to find words to adequately describe Mr. Foden's playing. He has invented and mastered effects unknown to other guitarists. Cadenza, February 1904.
It was a watershed event in the history of classical guitar in America. Foden took on mythical status in the U.S., and his name became known of in Europe and South America. In 1911, at age 51, because of his enormous popularity, Foden and his family moved to New York. He soon formed the Big Trio. bandmates were Giuseppe Patina on mandolin and Frederick Bacon playing tenor banjo. Patina at this time was thought to be the greatest mandolin player alive. Bacon was a master banjo maker, virtuoso player, and would one day go into business with David Day and produce the much revered Bacon and Day banjos. The Big Trio was the first supergroup and toured 50 U.S. cities to rave reviews during the next year. In 1912, iconic American guitar maker C.F. Martin made its first artist guitar, the Foden Special, sold exclusively by William Foden. At this time, it was virtually unheard of for a company to produce a special model for an individual artist. An advertisement in the April 1913 issue of Cadenza magazine states that the Martin Foden Special guitar was the Stradivarius of the guitar family. During his years in New York, Foden taught on 42nd Street at the Wurlitzer Music Company. George Van Epps, Alvino Ray, Sophocles Pappas, and many other popular jazz guitarists took lessons in finger technique from him. In 1927, Foden performed at an acclaimed event at Town Hall in New York. He appeared with popular artists Shirley Spalding, Albert Belson, and fabled Gibson instrument designer Lloyd Loar. Foden would retire from the stage the next year. Foden continued to teach in New York for 12 more years. In 1939, he returned to St. Louis at age 79. Mr. Foden spent his remaining years teaching music to students from his home on Arsenal Street in St. Louis. Foden was a prolific writer and arranger during his lifetime. He had begun writing his masterpiece, the Grand Sonata, in 1904, and did not finish the work until 1941. The Foden Hoskins collection at the Missouri History Museum includes hundreds of his scores for solo-fretted instruments, plus a variety of arrangements for ensembles. The influenza pandemic of 1947 took the lives of William Foden, 87, his wife Mary, 84, and their only son Edmund, 61, between March 14th and April 9th. In 1996, the Guitar Foundation of America dedicated a memorial in New St. Marcus Cemetery to recognize the accomplishments of William Foden. One of William Foden's most successful students was a teenager named George C. Krick. George Krick was the third in that trio of men responsible for bringing the Spanish style of classical guitar to St. Louis and ultimately the entire country. Born in Germany in 1871, he emigrated to St. Louis with his family, a popular destination for German immigrants. America's fourth largest city, St. Louis was a center for the performing arts and music publication. Little is known of his family's adjustment to life in St. Louis. His parents worked at unskilled trades, and his three sisters worked as domestic servants. Young Krick worked at odd jobs, purchased a mandolin, and began looking for a teacher.
On a bright sunny morning in 1890, as I entered a little music shop in St. Louis to take a mandolin lesson, there came from the back room the most beautiful music I ever heard. Some minutes later, William Foden stepped out, a guitar in his hands. I questioned him, and he told me he had been playing the Grand Sonata by Fernando Sor. The next week, I had my first guitar lesson with him. George C. Krick.
William Foden soon became one of the most important influences in the life of George Krick. Foden taught Krick everything he knew about music, from musical performance to good business management. Now, Foden was a master at arranging for both quartet and quintet ensemble music, so George Krick played first mandolin in the William Foden Quartet, which performed regularly throughout the Midwest. Foden was a very strict master and forbade wasting time with any casual conversation during practice. George Krick was one of the first to purchase a Gibson Lloyd Loar mandolin, and Gibson advertisements featured his endorsement. Krick and Foden were both acquaintances of Lloyd Loar and performed with him on occasion. Krick moved from St. Louis to Germantown, a suburb of Philadelphia, and opened the George C. Krick Studio of Music in 1904. In 1907, Krick began a solo concert career that took him across America and Europe. George Krick was twice elected president of the American Guild of Banjoists, Mandolinists, and Guitarists. He appeared with Carl Schopp in a Crescendo magazine illustration for the Guild's 1911 Grand Festival concert. In 1912, Krick organized an event that would change his life. He sponsored the first U.S. concert by Spanish guitarist Miguel Llobet and was profoundly influenced by the experience. Krick left Llobet's concert and began to study what he had heard and absorbed. He realized that the concept of the guitar as an instrument to only accompany other instruments was no longer the only acceptable approach to the guitar. He could see that a paradigm was developing in the style used by Spanish classical guitarists. Within the next 4 years, Krick had adapted many of Llobet's pieces into his own concert repertoire. Krick also continued to play the mandolin, and in 1918 he formed the highly acclaimed Krick Plectrum Quartet with piano accompaniment. Later, he would perform regularly on Philadelphia radio programs, both with and without his quartet. George Krick had become so successful by 1912 that he bought a magnificent home in Philadelphia, which was featured on the cover of Cadenza magazine. The article explained that Krick, a single man all of his life, was proof that a good living could be made by both performing and practicing good business management, the goal of a working musician. George Krick was invited to the White House under 2 administrations. He met Presidents Woodrow Wilson in 1916 and Warren Harding in 1923. During a concert tour of Germany in 1924, Krick became friends with a young Andres Segovia and other masters of the Spanish guitar. Krick worked with concert promoter Saul Hurok in bringing Andres Segovia to America for the first time in 1928. Messrs. Foden and Krick were in the audience at Segovia's first American concert. George Krick credited himself as the photographer in a famous image of Segovia, Llobet, and friends taken in Munich in 1924. While in Europe, Krick wrote articles about the Spanish guitarists for the American music magazine Crescendo. His articles represented some of the first times the Spanish masters had received any notoriety in the United States. The articles described Spanish guitar style and introduced American players to ideas about sitting position, right-hand technique, and the use of fingernails in playing. Krick met guitarist and luthier Hermann Hauser in 1924 when Hauser played with the Munich Guitar Quartet. In 1933, Andres Segovia began playing a Hauser guitar exclusively. Also in 1933, George Krick became the exclusive dealer for Herman Hauser guitars in the United States. In 1937, Krick began writing a monthly guitar column in the Etude music magazine. The column discussed guitar technique, history, and anything new in the classical guitar world. Krick became quite famous and well respected because of his Etude articles. He contributed articles until 1943. In 1950, at age 82, he returned to St. Louis and opened a music studio at 4746 McPherson Avenue. During the 50s, when rock and roll guitarists like Chuck Berry, Carl Perkins, Elvis Presley's guitarist Scotty Moore, and others were burning up the airwaves, George Krick kept busy teaching St. Louis guitar students and inspiring them with the recordings of Andres Segovia and other Spanish masters. One of Krick's students for a short time was the great St. Louis master guitarist Mel Bay. Krick coached him on right-hand technique for studio work Bay had scheduled in New York. Andres Segovia appeared at Washington University in 1961 through the efforts of his old friend, George Krick. Segovia is pictured here with Krick and his students, Fred Hafner, Arthur Hoskins, and Dr. Robert Zimmerman. He continued to teach classical guitar to promising students into the 1960s, and friends of George Krick gathered together in 1962 to celebrate his 90th birthday. His accomplishments and lifelong dedication to the classical guitar were featured in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. George Krick passed away from natural causes April 2, 1962, at age 90. His Hauser guitar and collection of music were given to his students upon his death. Today, most of his papers and music are at Washington University in St. Louis and the University of Colorado, Boulder. George C. Krick rests in St. Peter's Cemetery in St. Louis. The George C. Krick Classical Guitar Guild was formed June 9, 1963. The guild started small but grew to 36 members by 1965. George Krick protege Fred Hafner and his young student Douglas Neat were early members of the Krick Guitar Guild. Douglas Neat began lessons with guild member Alan Rosenketter in 1966. Upon graduation from Ladue High School, he attended the Juilliard School of Music. Neat would play Carnegie Hall and would come to be recognized as one of the world's greatest guitarists. In 1964, Krick Guitar Guild member and St. Louis native Alan Rosenketter attended La Scola Cantorum in Paris to study with Ida Presti and Alexander Lagoya. In 1966, Rosenketter joined other distinguished graduates from La Scola Cantorum, one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. He returned to St. Louis and was elected president of the Guitar Guild in 1967. He quickly proved to be a man of vision. Under his leadership, funds were raised to bring Italian guitarist Oscar Ghiglia to St. Louis for an artist-in-residence program at Washington University. 25 students from around the country came to St. Louis for a series of master classes. Rosenketter advised St. Louis Music Company on the design of their first classical guitars. Today, they are known as Alvarez Yari. In one of his first acts as president of the Guitar Guild, Alan Rosenketter began a concert series. Missouri guitarist Richard Johnson performed the first concert in 1967. A Kansas City native, Johnson studied with Walter Fritchie, who had been a student of William Foden. Johnson was selected by Andres Segovia for classes at Santiago de Compostela in 1965 during tough international competition. Many of the world's most respected classical guitarists appeared in the Classical Guitar Guild's yearly concert series. In 1980, the George Krick Classical Guitar Guild became the St. Louis Classical Guitar Society. 1980 also marked the beginning of a new era in leading the society through the years to come. Kathy and Bill Ash were elected vice president and president of the St. Louis Classical Guitar Society. Kathy and Bill shared a vision and purpose that has guided the Guitar Society to this day. They tirelessly dedicated their talents to the advancement and growth of the organization. Tragically, the Society suffered a tremendous loss in 2009 when Kathy Ash died suddenly from heart failure. Kathy's dedication is one of the reasons why we are able to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the St. Louis Classical Guitar Society. Under Bill and Kathy's leadership, the St. Louis Classical Guitar Society has grown to be one of the nation's largest and most active classical guitar organizations, providing concerts, master classes, children's concerts, the School Guitar Initiative, as well as membership events. For 50 years, the Guitar Society has offered its members the opportunity to meet, to play together, and to learn from each other. Our membership meetings allow everyone to bring their favorite guitar and play music they have been practicing. The Society also has a large guitar orchestra, which plays at all membership meetings and various events around town. Membership gatherings are always meant for enjoyment and fellowship. For decades, world-class concert guitarists have provided master classes for students through the Guitar Society. Most students are from the St. Louis area, but some travel many miles to learn and improve their skills. From fingering technique to musical interpretation, internationally respected master classical and flamenco guitarists have provided guidance to our students. Since 1987, the St. Louis Classical Guitar Society has presented free school concerts by world-renowned artists. Audience participation is always encouraged. Nearly every school district in St. Louis has participated in concerts sponsored by the Society. The concerts are often a student's first experience with music in a classic live performance setting. Students eagerly look forward to the shows. Evaluation and feedback from teachers have proven the program is a big hit. The concerts also allow casual time for staff to get to know the artists. In 2010, a public school guitar initiative was undertaken to provide classical guitars to disadvantaged schools in the city. First, we solicited support by demonstrating the beauty of the classical guitar to our generous donors. We explained that educational studies have proven that children who study the arts demonstrate improved critical thinking skills and show significant increases in SAT scores in both language skills and in math. These children are 3 times more likely to be awarded for increased school attendance. And studies have shown that having music classes and instruments for students has a measurable impact on deterring delinquent behavior among at-risk youth. When sponsors help, great things happen. The Centene Corporation, St. Louis Cardinals Care, Music Folk, D'Addario String Company, Albert Augustine Guitar Strings, and many gracious private donors. Once funds were available, a major problem became a lack of good quality half-size and three-quarter size classical guitars in the market. With creative help from the Augustine String Company, we designed special guitars and had them manufactured in Asia. One exciting day in the summer of 2012, the delivery truck arrived. The rollicking good fun began in just unpacking the guitars. After tuning up, Society President Bill Ash gave the new guitars a test drive. The quality of the guitars exceeded our expectations in both their manufacture and their sound. Our first delivery was to the Central Visual and Performing Arts High School, and they immediately took to the instruments. Gateway High School has a great program and a great guitar teacher in Mr. Stephen Hill. Mr. Hill has over 60 students on a waiting list to take guitar lessons. Lion Academy at Blow started their program last year and has already given guitar ensemble performances. Schools like Langston and Sherman Elementary received guitars. The Sherman Elementary Guitar Trio was ready to learn. Soldan High School, where Tennessee Williams attended, started a guitar program with their new guitars. The Classical Guitar Society was able to provide 40 guitars each to many of the different schools during the first 2 years of our program. 200 to 300 children have been provided with newly discovered personal achievement and a productive new interest. The program is proving very successful with great participation from students. Many of the students had considered dropping out of school until the guitar class came along and gave them an exciting new challenge. Although there is still much work to be done in the school guitar programs and other Guitar Society work, the foundation of that work is solid and the future bright as we welcome our next 50 years.